License costs are skyrocketing. Enterprises and governments are in turmoil. The future is uncertain. Where can we turn for solutions to the VMware crisis? Let's meet the Microsoft solutions we need right now. I'm Michael Richardson, CTO of Dynamic Consultants Group, and your host for this exciting podcast series. I'm happy to introduce Bronson Magnan, a real in the trenches expert for complex on-prem Microsoft solutions. Bronson, would you share a little bit more about yourself?
Hi, Michael. Yeah, my name is Bronson Magnan. I work for Coastal IT Consulting. We're headquartered in Naples, Florida. I've been in the IT industry for 18 years. Before that, I studied computer science, but was in management. Um, the Cisco education was in vogue back then, so I went to night school, got some Cisco certifications, and started configuring frame relay clouds, if anyone remembers those, and site-to-site VPNs for local government. Then I got into Windows Server around version 2003 and Citrix. My first server virtualization platform was XenServer, if you can remember that. When WinServer 2012 came around, we got into the SPLA licensing program for hosters and started selling, remote desktop, hosted desktop environments. And these systems were Hyper-V clusters with storage spaces classic, if you remember that. It was like an HP chassis with RDMA over InfiniBand and scale file servers and SAS attached JPods. That was the golden age right there. It was fun.
That's cutting edge in those days for
Yeah.
sure. That's really awesome. Hey, what do you know about what's going on with VMware right now? Like, what can you tell us about the VMware situation, and why do you think organizations should care about that?
Oh, yeah. So Broadcom, the acquisition seems like they want to make the most amount of money for the least amount of effort. As I understand it, they want to keep the largest 10 or 20% of their customers, and the way they're getting rid of the rest is making it untenable through licensing and support program changes, like huge increases is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's obviously that's a big deal because VMware is such a ubiquitous. I mean, it's everywhere. It seems like. I looked up some stats not too long ago, and it's like 75% of the Fortune 500 use VMware, and the rest secretly probably use VMware somewhere in the organization. It's really widely used, and so this is impacting a lot of organizations, small and large. But something that I've heard a little bit is, VMware's historically been kind of the go-to for complex virtualization requirements. I know you've built and deployed some really, really complex and interesting solutions. So I'd love to hear about what you've deployed. I know you're more of a Hyper-V Azure Stack kind of guy. So tell us about some of the stuff you've had going on.
Oh, yeah. So we've always been doing the smaller scale virtual desktop environment hosting as a SPLA partner. But when I saw the feature set in the TAP program for Windows Server 2016, like back in the technical preview, it enabled for the first time hosting a 100% Microsoft stack for a hosting business, a data center. And after doing some business modeling in Excel, I decided it was time to launch a new offering. What Windows Server 2016 brought was Storage Spaces Direct, Hyper-V converged clusters, software-defined networking, policy-based DNS, GPU direct device assignment, and so many advanced security and automation features. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome, and that's a neat business model. You guys were able to leverage that SPLA program to do that in a way that's I'm guessing a lot more cost effective. I mean, you did the math. Tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about that.
So we're a specialized solutions hoster for engineering firms, offering hosted desktops built on Windows Remote Desktop Services with NVIDIA GPUs. The hosted desktops are ideal for CAD work as well as running GPU-dependent engineering applications. We were actually like one of the first 3 partners in North America for NVIDIA. They've since done away with NVIDIA's done away with their version of the licensing program for that, and they're just switching to buy our cards and use them for whatever you want now. But it used to be a user would actually check out a license for the driver. And you had to have an NVIDIA licensing server in the data center for them to get the driver package that they were assigned, and it came with different features for the driver. Like there was one for uh, quadro or non-quadro is basically what the breakdown was, whether you wanted that feature set. Um, but it's going flat now, so they don't have a need for hosting partners anymore.
Yep. Yep. That makes sense. So, um, you guys picked Hyper-V at the time. It was really kind of launching into all this technical depth and complexity that it could handle. I mean, it'd been around for a while already, but now some of the advanced features, 2016 was where a lot of that really came into fruition. Um, so why Hyper-V and why not VMware? Why?
Yeah, so excellent question, because VMware is a great product, but there's two reasons. First, we have engineering goals of 100% virtualization and 100% automation. Having the entire stack built on Microsoft means it's all configurable through PowerShell, which means you can have 100% automation if you try hard enough. Secondly, as a hoster, IT is my business. It's not a cost center. So I'm motivated to do two things. One, build services that my customers want to use and more importantly, are willing to pay for. And two, to make money. Unlike enterprise IT, it's a cost center. We need to generate a profit. Having an entire data center run off of 100% Microsoft stack saves costs with no additional licensing from third parties.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And I think that's part of the reason right now we're starting to see so many people ask questions about Hyper-V and Azure Stack HCI is the licensing difference. If I'm already buying, Windows Server Data
Right.
Center,
Yeah.
I already am paying for all of these great Hyper-V features. So I think that's really, really interesting. And you guys took advantage of that to be able to really deliver a cost-effective solution and are still doing that today. So that's pretty neat. Um, what are some of the advanced features of Hyper-V that are really enabling your solutions? You want to go into a little technical depth there with what's powering that?
Yeah, software-defined networking is really important. It's essentially what enables you to be a hoster and have multiple tenants. And you don't have to have devices at the top of the rack like extra routers and load balancers and stuff like that. You're basically the whole data center is all switches and servers, switches and servers. There's no SANs because it's all uh, local storage on the servers in
Mhm.
storage spaces direct. So it's two types of devices that you need. Granted, sometimes you have some attached JBODs if you want to build really big S2D clusters for like backup systems to run
Mhm.
off of. But it's mainly the same pieces of equipment over and over again. And you have to
So
have your
that
network. Yeah.
simplifies your hardware chain then at that point, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
everything's configurable from a software perspective. You're just defining virtual networks, defining your routers and gateways, defining customer networks. That's a
Yeah.
neat
The,
approach.
the only places where you can get caught up in costs really is drivers and OEM specific stuff. Like every OEM has a different way to interface with their out of band management in order to automate doing things like switch it to high power mode and turning on virtualization, the right processor set features, and turning on the TPM 2.0 stuff like that. It is it's a little bit different for every OEM, but we try to stick with one or two. I won't say which ones we use, but they're definitely ones that currently sell Azure Stack HCI supported solutions.
Absolutely,
So
that makes
yeah,
sense.
even like technically speaking, we were for one of these OEMs, we were the first one ever to use GPUs with Hyper-V with them, and it was a interesting process where I had to work with labs in this might give away who they are, but I had to work with labs in Germany, Mexico, and China to get these systems sort of like certified for manufacturing. And
Hmm.
I had to sign a release saying that I would absolutely operate a data center at these temperatures because
Okay.
because it's their first time using GPUs, and it was they had thermal concerns, like they had to do some
Hmm.
chassis reengineering that would
Yeah,
happen after this.
yeah, that's really
Yeah.
interesting. So, okay, so we talked about networking and you just brought up GPUs. So What are you using GPUs for, and how does that work with Hyper-V?
Yeah, so the way I'm using it is through this feature called Direct Device Assignment, and now they have more on par GPU features with VMware, but I'm using a technology that takes an entire GPU off of a GPU card and puts it up into a single VM. So the GPUs that I have, I'm trying to fit as many in per node as I can. So I have two GPUs per node, or sorry, two cards per node that have four GPUs each on them. So I get 8 big CAD RDS systems per this type of host. And yeah, it's assigned to one virtual machine, which is an RDS host, and RDS utilizes GPUs both for the application, like AutoCAD or Adobe, but it also uses the GPUs to power the encoders, right? So that's what actually enables that kind of software to work on RDS. Is the fact that you have hardware assisted encoding, and it helps
Hmm.
on your endpoint if you have decoding as well, hardware assisted decoding. So GPU on the endpoint is still useful.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
So that
So
that enables that really crisp, performant visual
yeah,
experience, and you just can't do that kind of CAD work and other things without it. I mean, not just because you need the GPU, but trying to interact with a non-graphics accelerated desktop
right.
is just not the same level of experience.
The way you would have done it before in the past is you would basically install the RDS host on bare metal
Mm.
with the GPU, and then it would basically work the same way. But now, because of the DDA pass through, it can be virtualized, and we have a lot more flexibility. Granted, you
Yeah.
can't live migrate a DDA, but if you have applications that are less demanding than AutoCAD or some of these engineering apps, you can use this new feature they have, which is the GPU virtualization, where they
Hmm.
essentially split it up. I think it's SRIOV based.
Hmm.
So that's pretty neat. I don't have that was an Azure Stack HCI, which you cannot use for hosting, by the way, through
Yeah.
the SPLA program. So I'm using Windows Server, and it's coming in 2025.
Yep.
Um,
The GPU partitioning and
right.
and live migration too, right? The
Yeah.
live migration with GPUs.
Yeah. Basically, what I do right now is I have scripts and automation runbooks that will shut down the VMs and then dismount the GPU and then move it to another node in the cluster. It actually has to recluster the VM, quick migrate it to another node in the cluster, decluster it so it's a standalone VM again, attach it to the GPU, and then start it back up.
Hmm.
So, doing that by hand would be impossible, but you script that out. That's one of the things you automate
Yeah, absolutely.
to get around it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But with all the work you've done in automation, I mean, that's allowed you to virtualize this and to be at a scale where if you were doing physical machines, you couldn't do. Um, so you're getting density without, the extra VMware cost. So
Yeah.
um, it works for you. And a lot of this is getting simpler, right? Like we said, 2025,
Yes.
which is not far away,
Yeah. Well,
is gonna give you the live migration, the GPU partitioning, those types of things.
that's going to enable more bang for your buck because you're going to be able to buy GPU cards that have massive GPU cores on them, which before would
Hmm.
be a waste to put in one RDS host. But with the partitioning, you can get many out of the one core or out of the
Yep.
one GPU core. So that's going to be good. Depending on the price of GPUs, which have been crazy occasionally. It goes up and
Hmm.
down based on the Bitcoin miners and the AI companies and stuff.
Yep.
Um, yeah, it's a wild price differences.
Absolutely. And then, so we talked about networking, we talked about GPUs. How about storage? What are you doing for storage, and why that architectural choice?
So yeah, storage spaces, direct clusters, and we have some HCI and we have some accessing storage over SMB, where the S2D cluster is just basically a softs, and that's not
Mhm.
great for licensing, but it does allow for a lot of flexibility um, in the data center. Because with HCI, it's got this one inherent problem where you can fill it up unevenly. You understand? Like if you got like a base VM size of like four GPU or four CPUs and 16 gigs of RAM and this big of a hard disk, right?
Hmm.
Um, if you keep applying that template to the HCI, you're either going to run out of compute or storage first, and then something is going to be wasted, right?
Right.
So actually running disaggregated is a way to ensure that you're getting maximum fullness of your data
Yep.
center. Even though it does, you're kind of spending extra in the licensing for the storage only clusters at that point. But
Yeah. Let me unpack a few of those things for our listeners. So if you're not familiar with Storage Spaces Direct, so that's Microsoft's software defined storage. So local disks, no RAID cards, and then you're enabling that kind of virtual SAN experience just using the Storage Spaces Direct features. And so you get node reboots on one node, storage stays online. You have essentially instant live migrations inside the cluster. Really, really resilient storage. So, really, really neat technology. Much better than vSAN actually is the opinion I typically get out of people.
way more
More
performant.
performant,
Yeah.
yeah, and with the latest in 2025, and I think is it already in Azure Stack 23H2? I can't remember. The NVMe performance increases they saw
Yeah.
just
They
with some
rewrote some code.
yeah, with
Yeah.
some improved code, they're seeing 70% performance increase in NVMe storage on top of them being a leader in NVMe software defined storage anyway. Another 70% is amazing. So that's pretty exciting. But yeah,
And
so go ahead.
for extreme performance too, they also have the storage class memory option if you want it.
Yeah, the Optane stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. I haven't seen much of that in the wild, but it is pretty amazing. Like
Expensive.
if you need that top end, IOPS, you can really get it with the storage class memory. So again, just I want to unpack a little bit more of what you just said because the solution is really neat. So you've got storage spaces direct, so you can run compute and storage on the same nodes. Um, and then what you were talking about was alternatively you can do storage spaces direct and then do compute on different nodes and then just do that storage traffic over
Right.
SMB.
Yeah.
So you can scale your storage separately from your compute, so you're not wasting resources. And the kicker there is you need Windows Server Data Center licensing for the storage because SGD is a data center feature,
Right.
but then you're probably also running Windows VMs. So you need this for the density, you're going to have data center licensing on the compute host too. So you're kind of doubling up on licensing, but you're also not buying a SAN, and you're also saving on like you don't need as many CPU cores in the storage nodes. Probably you don't need as much memory. So there's some
Right.
trade-offs where you can kind of it ends up
With
justifying it.
That's what drives the licensing cost is the number of CPU cores, right? So if
Yep.
if your storage nodes have a lower count, you just want a fast gigahertz on them, but a
Yep.
lower count, which is the way CPUs tend to run anyways, where the faster the core is, the smaller core count you have. Lower your count, you can lower the licensing cost. The difference with volume licensing and SPLA is that there's a big minimum that you have to buy when you're
Hmm.
buying for using Windows Server to your business, right? I think it's two processors and like 16 cores total, maybe 16 cores each. But
Don't
with
don't quote me on this.
yeah,
Don't quote me on this, but I think in the SPLA program you can actually do just one processor at 16 cores.
yeah, one
I
one processor. Yeah,
so whether or not that's a good idea depends on your hardware and some other things, but the SPLA program there's a little bit of nuance there compared to the commercial, just purchasing licenses, things like
it's
that. So
just a lot more flexibility because we report our counts every month, right? So
yep,
if we make some changes, we're not wasting licensing every month. We're
yep,
paying for exactly what we're using essentially, which is
yep.
another one of those mechanisms that enables a hosting business.
Yep, yep, absolutely. Okay, so we talked about networking, storage, GPU. I don't know if there's anything on the compute side you want to talk about. I'll give you the opportunity if there's anything you wanted to share there.
Virtual TPMs are pretty big. That was a
Yeah,
feature that came out in 2016. So that way you can use BitLocker in the VM.
yeah.
Um, you can BitLocker your cluster shared volumes as well if
Hmm.
you want. That's very low performance impact. Um,
Yep, yep.
there's a lot of features that came out that are non uh, S2D related, non-networking related that came out in Windows Server that we
Hmm.
utilize in 2016. Um, but I don't know if you want to talk about those, but it's things
I mean, you can share. Yeah.
like DNS. They completely added a bunch of features to DNS, right? The GUIs haven't changed. You wouldn't know, but the PowerShell you can see. Basically, they've given you all the tools that you need to build like the same thing as Azure Traffic Manager,
Hmm.
right? So global server load balancing that's name and policy based. Uh, so that came out. That was really neat. They added some security features like the shadow principal groups, where you can
Hmm.
have a basically you can sync in an admin account from like a tenant admin domain to the tenant domain, and uh, and
Like
the
just in time type of admin. Is that what we're talking about?
yeah, the shadow principal is like you can have group membership that will go away based on amount of time,
Hmm.
right? It's pretty interesting stuff. Um, Yeah,
Yeah,
a lot of
yeah,
security features were added. I
yeah.
like all of 2016, as I understand it, all the security features was in a response to the Snowden leaks and new
Hmm.
government requirements. So yeah, that's when they added the JIT and GIA stuff.
Yep,
Um,
yep.
yeah,
Yeah, so, some other things that, and this is actually unique to Hyper-V. You can't actually do this on HCI. I don't know if you guys were using this or not, but the shielded VM stuff, where as a hoster, you can actually lock yourself out and only give your clients access to VMs, which depends on your business model, depends on your clients, whether that's a good thing or not. But it gives you that layer of security that it's kind of similar in Azure. It's like,
yeah,
okay, we don't Microsoft doesn't have access inside your VM, like you have access and you hold the encryption keys and everything. So
right. That's a business model where if you don't have a relationship between the customer and the hoster, where the customer is actually deploying their VMs. With us,
mhm,
it's we're deploying the customer stuff and we're managing it and as an MSP as well and doing all the configuration and stuff. So it doesn't make sense to keep us out of it since we're the IT department for them essentially.
right.
Yeah.
Yep, yep,
So
totally.
I,
But that's another complex scenario
yeah.
that Hyper-V can support. So anyway.
It's got some restrictions. Like at the time, maybe they fix this in newer versions, but you can't use it with GPUs. You can
Oh,
have
you could be
direct
right.
device
Yeah.
assignments with the hardware, and also there's little nuances to it. Like they don't bug check. A guarded host doesn't bug check
Hmm.
unless you configure a certificate to encrypt the dump file with, because
Hmm.
as part of like the security, it's not going to produce a dump output of its memory contents that
Right.
attacker could just grab, right? So you have to go in and you have to configure um, a certificate to encrypt the dump file. So it's a lot of work for
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
feature.
It is. It is for sure. Well, you know, this has been really good. Like, just kind of diving into the guts and the nuance. Um, I think maybe just a couple more questions, and of course, feel free to share anything else you feel like we've missed. But you know, I was going to ask. Well, no, I've got actually I missed this one. So tell me a little bit more about the business scenarios and the business case that you're really trying to solve for here. And I know we talked about you being a hoster and doing SPLA, and that's a big part of the why Hyper-V for you is just
Cost, yeah.
cost effectiveness is a lot higher. Um, and then if you want to talk a little bit about the kind of end user business case that you're solving for a little bit more, that feel free to share that too.
We do have customers that have what you would call edge deployments, where it's a small amount of virtualization at the edge, and there are some OEMs that make servers that are that are U tall and half U wide. So it's really easy to put a small S2D cluster
Mm-hmm.
out in a customer's edge sites. And that's a really good case for Azure Stack HCI.
Yeah.
If the customer owns the hardware, then you can put the Azure Stack HCI on it,
Yep.
where you couldn't do if we were hosting the hardware, you
Yep.
know. So that's a good use case for Azure Stack HCI, which technically is an edge solution, right? You can have 16 nodes of it in a data center, but it's not like you can connect to Azure Stack HCI systems. Like if you
Mhm.
want data center scale, you need to use Windows Server.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. And that makes, I mean, yes, like you can manage it at scale. You could do it in a data center, but the like, let's move between clusters and some of that kind of stuff is not.
it's yeah, it's a nightmare for the software-defined networking, right? Because
Mhm.
your network controller is scoped to that cluster. Then
Yeah.
if you want to have multiple SDN infrastructures talk to each other, now you're having to do customers will have to configure tunnels between their VNets essentially, like non-encrypted tunnels, GRE ones,
Mm-hmm.
because it's all in your data center, so it's trusted. That's your equivalent of the Microsoft routing network
Yep.
inside your data center. But that's a giant pain in the butt.
Yeah.
Uh, I'd rather
Yeah.
just have like one area of the data center be under one set of network controllers
Yep.
and one SDN area. Like the Microsoft SDN isn't great enough where it'll scale for an entire data center right now because there are hard limits in it for the number of network interfaces it'll support and stuff. It's huge, huge amounts, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not tens of thousands.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. So, first of all, I really like and appreciate that perspective of like, hey, if I was going to do data center wide, that scale of deployment, I would do Windows Server versus Azure Stack HCI. That's a really interesting and helpful perspective. Um, I I've got to wonder, how is Microsoft doing it at scale? I mean, because they're using their own platform to
They're
build
not
Azure.
using Azure Stack HCI though. They're using
No,
Azure.
no, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. So I mean, they're using, the OS and they're doing, but the management plane is a little bit
Yeah.
different.
I
So
think
that's
I think
fair.
I've heard that the minimum deployment size for them for a compute cluster is 25 racks
Yeah.
worth of servers. So that's a whole different scale that the Azure Stack HCI will never
Yep.
go to manage. And even like System Center would have problems with a couple of those.
Sure. Sure.
Uh,
That makes a lot of sense.
but you
So
do have a
that's
lot of,
that's
I was gonna say, you do have a lot of enterprises that just have data centers full of VMware, right? Rows and rows and rows
yep.
of VMware. So that's a
Yep.
that's a big problem.
Yeah. So System Center then is where you go, right? If you're at that scale, or just your own custom automation, which I know is a lot of what you've
Yeah.
done, but
There's advantages and disadvantages to System Center. The advantage is it's ready to go, like it's a built product. The
yep.
disadvantage is it always seems to lag behind Windows Server and the features that it'll support. Like when
Yep.
Windows Server 2016 came out, the System Center that came out with it like barely supported software-defined networking. It didn't even support setting up any load balancer stuff. All that had to
Hmm.
be done under the hood with PowerShell. Um, and just it's always going to be, it seems like one or two versions behind the feature set of Windows Server because they have to develop it not just for Windows Server but for VMware and Zen Server as well. And
Yep.
maybe that will go away now, their
Yep.
development target for that, and they have to support third-party load balancers and all kinds of stuff. So
Yeah.
maybe if they really focused on it, it'd be a great product if they
Yep.
focused it just to Microsoft infrastructure.
Yep.
But yeah, I actually
Yeah.
do have a plan for like migrating entire data centers from VMware to the Windows Server.
Yeah.
If you're interested in that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's some. I think that would be a great like next conversation. We should talk about that. That would be a lot of fun to like dive into the guts of what would a whole data center migration look like from
Yeah,
VMware to Hyper-V. That would be fun.
yeah. So I've got broken down into primarily 8 steps or 8 rules. The first one is before you touch anything, you need to decide on the strategy for infrastructure management. It
Mhm.
depends on your scale, like we are talking about, and what you want to accomplish. Do you go with System Center? Do you go with the individual management tools, which is like the various MMCs and the Hyper-V GUI and Windows Admin Center? Do you go third party, which could be a good bet for an enterprise, or do you want to roll your own in Visual Studio?
Mhm.
So you have to decide on your management structure, and the reason I say that is because it's going to change how you deploy things and how
Yeah.
you plan. So you have to ahead of time. You got to start with that, and then once you have your management strategy in place, then you need to invest in training your people. Very important, often overlooked thing.
Mhm.
The people running the infrastructure, these are entirely different technologies than vSphere, ESXi, vSAN, and NSX.
Yep.
Um, Additionally, your fabric's now going to have an Active Directory and DNS requirement that it didn't really have before. So you're going to need people that know how to maintain an Active Directory as well. So your employees have to go through the training, so to speak,
Yep.
and get
Yep.
caught up. And
Which
then
is doable. I mean, it's
yeah,
a lot of similar concepts. So I wouldn't say like, okay, you need years and years, but it is different, right? Like
it's
there are
different.
there's nuances and it's a different platform. And, so that's definitely true.
Yeah, a friend of mine, when I was getting introduced to Windows Server 2016 in TAP, a friend of mine told me that, oh, Bronson, take everything you knew about building data centers in 2012 R2 and chuck it in the bin because everything has changed. I'm like, okay, and it's all for the better. Believe me,
Yeah.
all the changes were for the better. SDN V1 was kind of a mess and really hard to work with. SDN version 2 is really good. So the second or the third thing would be now that you have your employees trained, now you need a networking strategy. Um, it's not important for a single rack, but critical if you have rows and rows of racks, right?
Hmm.
And if you want to use Microsoft software-defined networking, you have networking considerations to think about. Like you need to think about how your BGP areas are laid out, because SDN uses it uses the eBGP protocol, but it uses it in an internal context. It's not like iBGP where you have to have full mesh peering. Uh, is eBGP, but it's just used internally. Um, you need to consider how those BGP areas are laid out. Your traffic flow is now asymmetrical. What that means is that traffic comes in through the top rack switches down to the load balancers, and then when it leaves through the management interface of the host. Okay, so if you have firewalls at the edge, traditional firewalls, if they're doing TCP state monitoring to allow the traffic back out, that's not going to work anymore. You have to go stateless filtering for the traffic flows because it's asymmetric. Um, that's something people don't consider. The routing of traffic internally is done with eBGP, and the flows between your spine and top rack switches are based off of equal costs multipath routing ECMP BGP routes between the TORs and the load balancers. You actually have three BGP areas in a Microsoft software-defined data center. You have the area of the spine, and the entire spine shares that BGP area. And you have the area of the virtual area made up of the SDN load balancers and the SDN gateways. And that's one single area. Where you have differences is every top of rack switch is its own BGP area. Okay. So I have like diagrams and stuff of all this because it's really hard to wrap your head around in a conversation. If you had
Yeah.
something in front of you, it probably make more sense. But this goes to the complexity of it, right? And the importance of planning. Um, so like the Microsoft infrastructure works really well in what's called a clause topology, and that is a spine Tor type scenario where your Tor switches, top of rack switches, are connected to every spine to every switch in the spine.
Hmm.
So the way your rack layout would look is you have like, 16 or 18 2U servers in a rack. Then you got your BMC switch. You've got your two top of rack switches, and you've got one switch from the spine. Okay. And every rack in the row has a spine switch in it. And basically, you're connecting all of your TORs to all of the spines, creating this mesh like that. And that's the best way to do it, so you can have um, your east-west and north-south traffic work correctly. Now, It's critical for SDN, as well as if you're going to have RDMA leave the rack, like if you want to do storage replica from one rack to another, um, or yeah, or anything with guest RDMA, you want to use like Mellanox NICs that do the Rocky V2 routable Rocky, and you need your switches configured so that Rocky can leave the top of rack switch and flow through the spine correctly. It's all lossless. That's going over, subnets, not just layer 2 boundaries.
Hmm.
Um, let's see, networking.
And there's a lot to all that,
Yeah,
but what that's doing from a business perspective is enabling, when it's architected properly, is now you're able to deliver customer networks or department networks if you're an
yeah,
enterprise, right? Internal customers, kind of this private cloud experience to different departments. You can do that network isolation all in software at the hypervisor layer.
yeah.
So
Basically, don't use the model of core distribution access for a network topology.
right,
And what you really should be doing nowadays in a data center scale, anyways, is you should be using some sort of class
yeah,
topology or a modified one, or even a 3-stage one if you're really big, where you have a super spine. Um, now, so after networking, there's a lot to say about networking, probably more than anything. But and I don't know if that's because I'm a networking guy or not. But the fourth item, we're on 4, right? Yeah, 4. Um, you need to keep a separate fabric from your business environments, and
mm,
a separate AD forest in the fabric than the business environments. The fabric and the CorpNet should not be able to talk to each other. There should be no trusts. It should be entirely separate AD forest, different admin accounts. People access it through privileged access workstations. You don't want a a before, your VMware servers weren't susceptible to getting crypto locked, right? But now they're running Windows. Okay. So you have to consider a security boundary between your workloads and your infrastructure to make
mhm,
sure that if you have something go awry in the tenant space, it never can affect the fabric space. You want your backup systems in the fabric too, as well isolated. Uh, so yeah, different force. Number 5, you need to consider how you're going to be converting all of those VMware VMs into Hyper-V VMs. That
mhm,
is going to be a big portion of the migration time. And if you've got 10,000 VMs, you're probably going to want multiple licenses of whatever third-party tool you pick to do the
yep,
conversion. So you can have multiple jobs going at once. Uh, you know, it really depends on your scale, but
yep,
there's a there's a lot of good third party tools. I'm done doing it by hand. I used to do a VMware and Hyper-V VM conversion by hand, but it's too detailed work for me to do
mhm,
anymore, especially once we started changing from to Gen 2 VMs with UFI. It got a lot more complicated. Um, So that's converting the VMs. Let's see, 6. Yeah, with all those in consideration, you've got your new architecture, you've done your deep dive in network planning, and you should have an Excel workbook full of IP network space planning. Know the IP address of every serial number or host name for everything they'll be deployed. The IP address space, the subnetting, strategic CIDR summarization, and BGP areas are critical factors in success and speed of the migration. All the planning needs to be done beforehand. 7, make sure you hire outside consultants that are subject matter experts. Um, it's going to be knowledge during the architecture phase, really, before you buy anything or reuse
mhm,
anything. Um, Really, it's going to be knowledge that your organization is going to need for the migration, but not need to have long term. It's like an implementation thing and not a day 100 thing.
yep,
Uh, Definitely make use of them. And 8, automate everything. Do not configure anything by hand when you're dealing with scale. Consistency
yep,
and predictability is key at scale. Automate
yep.
everything. Um,
And PowerShell is your friend if you're gonna go down that path, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, there's other ways, but I mean, in the Windows Microsoft world, PowerShell is really pretty universal, and it's great.
What I do for deployment of hosts and sometimes virtual machines is I use a product by Microsoft. It's a free product. It's called Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, and it
Hmm.
was originally built for deploying workstations, right? And but you can use it for servers, and it's great. You can have an automated system built where you have up-to-date images generated every month, both for tenant virtual machine deployment from your library, but
Hmm.
also for deploying Fabric hosts.
Hmm.
And you utilize Pixie. Uh,
Hmm.
it's Windows Server WDS, and basically that runs the MDT boot image, and you utilize the out-of-band management on the hosts to be able to set them to boot to ISO or boot to network rather,
Hmm.
and you can deploy the operating system and the drivers with MDT and get all the get all the static IP addresses and stuff set up, and you can leave it in that state and then onboard it to System Center if you want, or use additional non-System Center automations to go from there. I like doing a thing where a lot of people a lot of people like to put their network on the untagged VLAN. I'm sorry, their management network on the untagged VLAN. I
Hmm.
use the untagged VLAN for the Pixie network. Okay. And the reason is once it's deployed, what it forces it to do when the management of the host switches over from the tag network to the untagged network to the tag network is that it's forced to the DNS client fires off and re-registers, which is critical if you're doing something like a VMM deployment,
Hmm.
right? Um, because a lot of times those will fail because the DNS doesn't catch up when the virtual switch is created. But if
Hmm.
you're actually changing a VLAN boundary, then it forces it to re-register the DNS. Um, and let's see, MDT deployment for automation of the hosts.
Yeah. Was that
Um,
8? Was that number 8? Automate everything?
yeah, I'm just going into more details about what can be
Yeah.
automated, but pretty much everything can be automated. Um, Basically, you only need Windows Server, SQL Server, and MDT, and you can build a whole data center management platform with
Yeah.
PowerShell. Yeah.
Amazing. Cool. Well, this has been really an awesome deep dive into some of the guts of Hyper-V and some of the really at scale things that are possible. It's been fun. Is there any kind of last advice you'd give with an enterprise that's wrestling with, do I want to make the switch from VMware? Like, what is that something I really want to consider? What advice would you give?
Don't assume that your hardware is reusable.
Yep.
Because there are like when you're dealing with S2D, at least like the
Yep.
NICs really matter, and the storage matters, and what do you have inside the servers matters. Whether like the storage needs to be exposed over a SAS backplane or a SATA backplane, right? You can't
Mhm.
have a internal RAID
Right.
essentially, and the NICs matter because they need specific features. Even more so for SDN, you have feature requirements on your NICs and your switches that need
Hmm.
to be there. Um, so yeah, definitely when you get those consultants in during your architecture phase, they'll be able to tell you, okay, so this model of switch you have, we can reuse that. This model of host you have, we can reuse that. But this has got to get replaced, you
Yep.
know.
Yep.
So
And and honestly, I mean, if your hardware is more than about 3-ish years old, the newer hardware is so much more efficient. You're gonna help save a lot of cost there. You're saving a lot of cost on, okay, well, I'm not buying my 10x VMware license.
yeah,
I'm saving, so there's a lot of cost savings that can go into offset this. So, would people hear, oh no, I'm gonna have to buy new servers? Like, well, okay, but there's offsets here, so it's really not as bad as people make
yeah.
it out to
How
be.
large
But
how large is your VMware bill going to be? Right.
right,
Might
yep.
actually be cheaper to buy all new servers.
It seriously, it
Yeah.
it really might be. So, It's really interesting. Well,
Especially like if you deal with the right partner to sell you the servers, you can get the right kinds of volume discounts too.
yep,
Yeah.
yep, absolutely. Well, hey, this has been awesome. This has been a really good deep dive. I've really appreciated it. And Bronson, I know you've got a lot of things in motion right now, so I appreciate you taking time out of your very busy schedule to share with me and with the community. Um, Thank you. Thanks to our listeners. Come back for the next episode. We've got one more guest, and then we've got a panel coming. That's going to be a lot of fun. You can also find more content at richardsoncloud.com. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time.
It was fun, Michael. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you.